The Cuban Revolution, 1959, Third Form History. Objectives: identify Cuba on a map of the Caribbean, explain the causes of the Cuban Revolution, explain the consequences of the Cuban Revolution on the country and also on the wider Caribbean. Here we have a map of the Caribbean. The white arrow is pointing on the island of Cuba. The blue arrow is pointing on Florida, which is a part of the United States of America. To understand the Cuban Revolution, we have to go as far back as 1898. The Spanish and the Cubans were at odds with each other because the Cubans had wanted their independence. Of course, the Spanish refused because Cuba was too much of a valuable asset to them. The United States intervened on behalf of the Cubans, but they were not successful. The United States had sent a battleship to the Havana harbor. This battleship was called the Battleship Maine. On February 15, 1898, this battleship sunk. The United States blamed Spain for the ship sinking. And on April 25th, 1898, the United States declared war on Spain. This war was short-lived. The United States won. The war ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris was signed on December 10, 1898. As a result, Spain lost its control of the remainder of its overseas empires, which included Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippine Islands, Guam, and other islands around the world. The United States then forced the Cubans to sign what we called a Platt Amendment. The Platt Amendment stated that the Cuban government should give the U.S. the right to intervene in Cuba in order to protect her independence. The Cuban government will sell or lease land to the U.S. for a coaling or naval station. The government of Cuba should not enter in any treaty with any nation that will affect its independence, nor should the government allow any foreign nation to establish naval bases or coaling stations in Cuba. So basically, we're seeing here where the Cubans would have swapped one master for another, even though the United States did not colonize Cuba. But it is clear here that based on the terms of this Platt Amendment, that the Cuban government would have lost a little of its sovereignty by adding this Platt Amendment to their constitution. With the Platt Amendment firmly set in Cuba, it gave the Americans what we could term free reign in Cuba. The, the Americans would have had successive presidents who would have been loyal to the US and not necessarily to Cuba. One such president was Fulgencio Batista, and in 1952 he would have been serving his second term as president. It was said that he was a corrupt and brutal leader. He used gangsters to execute anyone who dared to oppose him. He allowed the United States to control more than 90% of many of Cuba's industries, such as mining, tobacco, and sugar. Havana, the capital of Cuba, became America's favorite playground. Here they built magnificent hotels where they gambled, got drunk. They did not allow blacks to enter their hotels or be on their beaches unless they worked there. Prostitution was also one of their favorite hobbies. The mob was said to be one of those groups that would have had casinos, hotels, and all other sorts of businesses in Cuba. Though Cuba was one of the richest countries in Latin America, only members of the upper class enjoyed a high standard of living. The majority of the Cubans were suffering. They lived in extreme poverty in the countryside. They had no running water or inside toilets. They suffered from malnutrition and various diseases. This was compounded by the fact that their living conditions were unsanitary and overcrowded. They could not afford a good education, and as such, the literacy rate was very high. A lot of persons were unemployed. Some who were employed were only employed seasonally. A lot of persons were underemployed, and Batista did nothing as it related to wages. So the Americans could pay the Cubans whatever it is they wanted to pay them. The government did nothing. So while the American businessmen and their fellow Americans worked in various businesses as managers and supervisors, they lived luxurious lifestyles while the majority of the Cubans lived in squalor. It is therefore easy to see how Cuba would have been ripe for a revolution. And a young lawyer known as Fidel Castro, who was also an activist, had petitioned the court to overthrow the president, Batista. Castro accused him of tyranny and corruption. However, Castro's arguments were rejected by the Cuban courts. After understanding that the Cuban regime could never be replaced by legal means, Castro went on to launch an armed revolution. He and his brother Raul formed a paramilitary organization by the name of the Movement, gathering weapons and around 1,200 men from Havana's working class by the end of 1952. On July 26, 1953, Castro and his brother Raul and a few other men launched an attack on the Moncada barracks. Of course, their mission failed because Batista's army was too large. They were captured and they were sentenced to 15 years in prison. Due to international pressure, Batista released all political prisoners, including the Castro brothers, in 1954. The brothers were exiled in Mexico. There, they trained and gathered followers. They met Che Guevara. They then returned to Cuba on a yacht known as the Granma in 1956. The group of about 80 men disembarked to Cuba on December 1956. Castro and his men lost the first battle. They retreated into the Sierra Maestra Mountains. Here, they were able to continue their guerrilla tactics, and along with this, they spread propaganda by telling the people of small town Cuba that they had come to bring freedom to their lands. His message spread, and soon an army of few became an army of thousands. Even though Castro's army became so large, he kept to his guerrilla tactics. Castro also got the support of peasants, the middle class, businessmen, the church, and even university students who were displaced because Batista had closed the Havana University. Eventually, Batista realized that he was not going to win the war, so he fled to the Dominican Republic and later to the United States. With this, Castro entered Havana as champion, and his supporters excitedly awaited their freedom. States who would have supplied him with arms, guns and ammunition, anything that he needed. And because he would have lost that support, it meant that the battle was lost. So Castro and his rebels basically had a free passage to just go into Havana and just seize the presidency. So on January 1, 1959, Fidel Castro and his band of rebels took over Cuba. Like we said, Batista fled to Florida for refuge. What were some of the changes that Castro brought about? Here are some examples. Castro built a number of new schools. Education was compulsory and free. Since more and more children could go to school, there was a decrease in the illiteracy rate. He built more health clinics, hospitals, and made other improvements to the healthcare sector. There was an end to the discrimination of Afro Cubans. Laws were passed to get rid of the prejudice that existed due to slavery. Castro's revolutionary government established housing schemes for the masses. In addition, he ordered the reduction of utilities and rent, so those that who could not afford to pay were not taken advantage of by greedy landlords. There were more jobs opportunities, new industries. The government would have owned these businesses and this would have provided jobs for the masses. New laws were passed of the Cuban Revolution and the rest of the Caribbean. Other Caribbean governments adopted some of Cuba's welfare policies to improve conditions for the poor, example Jamaica, Grenada, and Guyana. Two, the US was angry about Castro's ousting of the leader they liked. In addition, they punished any Caribbean country that had close relations with Cuba by refusing to lend them money. Jamaica experienced this under Prime Minister Michael Manley in the 1970s. Three, countries did not recognize Castro's government because they were